Hey, so we're back here for chapter 15, but I just want to let you know that I do not understand why my audio and visual get out of sync. Okay, but in the last chapter, it was there was like a pause, and that was when it righted itself. So I keep every time I make a video, I like store it to a hard drive and I delete the file. So I used to think that that's what it was, that it would say that it doesn't have space to be able to like do any more things, and that's what would fracture it. But it seems that whatever, it's just that's not the thing. So since this is a book, just hopefully you're patient with that, and I'm actually going to be switching over to a new camera soon anyway. So hopefully we won't have that problem anymore. Okay. So, chapter 15, my stroke of insight. Having taken this unexpected journey into the depths of my brain, I am grateful and amazed that I have completely recovered physically, cognitively, emotionally, and spiritually. Over the years, the recovery of my left hemisphere skills has been tremendously challenging for many different reasons. When I lost the function of my left brain's neurological networks, I lost not only function, but also a variety of personality characteristics that were apparently associated with those circuits of aptitude. I feel like I have cat fur on my nose. Okay. Um, Although I wanted to regain my left hemisphere skills, I must say that there were personality traits that tried to rise from the ashes of my left mind that, quite frankly, were no longer acceptable to my right hemispheric sense of who I now wanted to be. From both a neuroanatomal, oh my God, neuroanatomical and psychological perspective, I've had a fascinating few years. And I want you to understand that because understand it, overstand it. Okay. I want to get rid of the word understand completely from my dialogue. Okay. And like from the world in general. Um, you can learn new habits. Okay. Or you can like quit old habits, or you can move into a new environment and things can be going really well. But you know what they say is that neurons that fire together wire together. Okay. But once you stop activating that like superhighway by forming another one, and so new neurons that fire together wire together, that old highway is still there. It's like if if they build a new highway in your town, the old roads, they're still there. Okay, so you can take them if you want to. That's why addicts have to remember, addicts, like people who are addicted to things, they have to remember that you're never really in control of your addiction if you weren't at one time. Okay. What you are in control of is forming new habits. All right. And then having the knowledge that the old habits are still there, but they're dusty, man. You don't need them anymore. Okay. Just do what is in alignment for your best self. And if you go off path, have yourself an accountability partner to not let you go more than one day off path. Okay. All right. Okay. Let me just pause it so I can figure out where I was at. I noticed that I paused it right at like 318, which used to be my area code. So when numbers stand out like that, like how she was saying that her home phone number in the previous chapter was like her birth date when she moved back home. That's what it reminds me of. It's like I'm in the right place at the right time because I see synchronicities like that. Okay. The question I faced over and over again was, do I have to regain the affect, emotion, or personality trait that was neurologically linked to the memory or ability that I wanted to recover? For instance, would it be possible for me to recover my perception of myself, where I exist as a single, solid, separate from the whole, without recovering the cells associated with my egotism, intense desire to be argumentative, need to be right, or fear of separation and death? Okay. So when you this is something that you should understand. Intense desire to be argumentative. That is not you being humble. That is you being stuck in your ego. So if somebody tries to tell you something to explain themselves better to you so that you get to know them better, and it triggers something in you to take it personally and take offense to it, that is your ego. So you know that you are fueling it if you keep going in that direction. The ego, it takes time to get back out of it and to understand it. Okay. So don't be mad at yourself for doing that, or don't feel like the other person is wrong for striking that up in you. Just get to know it and learn. you will learn to get out of it quicker, okay? There is no way that once your ego is like on fire, that you are just like, well, this is not the right way to act, so I'm just going to turn it around and act right again. It's like that is not what happens. You have to take time to get back into who you want to be, okay? It takes time. If you get mad at your children, you can't just like you can't just you can't undo that right away, okay? If you're going to say like sorry for getting mad at you because you want to be a better parent to them, you should wait until you mean it, because if you take the time to like do stuff, to go and take a walk, to think about times when your child was like sick or when you couldn't be there to help them, it's going to activate your emotions for the child again. So you never have to feel regret for very long for just like always going with your ego instead of your heart, like the thing that made you want to have children in the first place. Okay. All right. So just let me make sure I'm starting at the right point. Hang on. Could I value money without hooking into the neurological loops of lack, greed, or selfishness? Could I regain my personal power in the world, play the game of hierarchy, and yet not lose my sense of compassion or perception of equality among all people? Could I re-engage with my family and not hook into my issues related to being a little sister? Most important, could I retain my newfound sense of connection with the universe in the presence of my left hemisphere's individuality? The point is that if she can, then so can you, okay? I wondered how much of my newly found right hemisphere consciousness set of values and resultant personality I would have to sacrifice in order to recover the skills of my left mind. I didn't want to lose my connection to the universe. I didn't want to experience myself as a solid separate as a solid separate from everything. I didn't want my mind to spin so fast that I was no longer in touch with my authentic self. Frankly, I didn't want to give up nirvana. What price would my right hemisphere consciousness have to pay so I could once again be judged as normal? Modern neuroscientists seem satisfied intellectualizing about the functional asymmetries of our two hemispheres from a neurological perspective, but there there has been minimal conversations pertaining to the psychological or personality differences contained within these two structures. Most commonly, the character of our right mind has been ridiculed and portrayed in an extremely unflattering light, simply because it does not understand verbal language or comprehend linear thought. In the case of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde analogy, our right hemisphere personality is depicted as an uncontrollable, potentially violent, moronic, rather despicable ignoramus, which is not even conscious, and without whom we would probably be better off. In vast contrast, our left mind has routinely been touted as linguistic, sequential, methodical, rational, smart, and the seat of our consciousness. Prior to this experience with stroke, the cells in my left hemisphere had been capable of dominating the cells in my right hemisphere. The judging and analytical character in my left mind dominated my personality. When I experienced the hemorrhage and lost my left hemisphere, language center cells that defined myself, those cells could no longer inhibit the cells in my right mind. As a result, I have gained a clear delineation of the two very distinct characters cohabitating my cranium. The two halves of my brain don't just perceive and think in different ways at a neurological level, but they demonstrate very different values based upon the types of information they perceive, and thus exhibit very different personalities. My stroke of insight is that at the core of my right hemisphere consciousness is a character that is directly connected to my feeling of deep inner peace. It is completely committed to the expression of peace, love, joy, and compassion in the world. This is not to say, of course, that I believe I exhibit multiple personality disorder. That is much more complicated than what I have observed. Traditionally, it has been difficult, if not impossible, for us to distinguish between our right and left mind characters is simply because we experience ourselves as a single person with a single consciousness. However, with very little guidance, most people find it is easy to identify these same two characters if not themselves. Within, if not themselves. Okay. Then at least their parents or significant other. Oh, okay. It is my goal to help you find a hemispheric home for each of your characters so that we can honor their identities and perhaps have more to say in how we want to be in the world. By recognizing who is who inside our cranium, we can take a more balanced brain approach to how we lead our lives. Okay, they have things called parts therapy, and that's kind of what this is. There's all kinds of different names for it, but we need to bring it down to like its most simple thing. So if we understand the difference between the right brain and the left brain, then we only have to memorize two different things. Okay. All right. It appears that many of us struggle regularly with polar opposite characteristics, holding court inside our heads. Damn, on my other channel, I made a video that was talking about holding court inside of ourselves. So if I figure out which one it was, maybe I'll link it to this. In fact, just about everyone I speak with is keenly aware that they have conflicting parts of their personality. Many of us speak about about how our head, left hemisphere, is telling us to do one thing, while our heart, right hemisphere, is telling us to do the exact opposite. Some of us distinguish between what we think left hemisphere and what we feel right hemisphere. Others communicate about our mind consciousness, left hemisphere, versus our body's instinctive consciousness, right hemisphere. Some of us talk about our small ego mind, left hemisphere, compared with our capital ego mind, right hemisphere, and our small self, left hemisphere, versus our inner or authentic self, right hemisphere. Some of us delineate between our work mind, left hemisphere, and our vacation mind, right hemisphere, while others refer to their research mind, left hemisphere, versus their diplomatic mind, right hemisphere. And of course, there is our masculine mind versus our feminine mind, and our yang consciousness, countered by our yin consciousness. And if you are a Carl Jung fan, which I am very much, then there's our sensing mind versus our intuitive mind, and our judging mind versus our perceiving mind. Whatever language you use to describe your two parts based on experience, I believe they stem anatomically from the two very distinct hemispheres inside your head. My goal during this process of recovery has been not only to find a healthy balance between the functional abilities of my two hemispheres, but also to have more say about which character dominates my perspective at any given moment. Okay, look, I'm so distracted because I like dog eared that page because what I'm going to do, because it kept saying right hemisphere, left hemisphere, we don't need that repeated over and over again. What I will do is I will put it into like a document, okay, like a slideshow. And then you can see all the different things, and maybe I can just make that into a class. All right. I find this to be important because the most fundamental traits of my right hemisphere personality are deep inner peace and loving compassion. I believe the more time we spend running our inner peace slash compassion circuitry, then the more peace and compassion we will project into the world, and ultimately the more peace and compassion we will have on the planet. Right? That's the ripple effect. It can't help but be that way. As a result, the clearer we are about which side of our brain is processing what types of information, the more choice we have in how we think, feel, and behave, not just as individuals, but as collaborating members of the human family. From the neuroanatomical perspective, I gained access to the experience of deep inner peace in the consciousness of my right mind, while the language and orientation association areas in the left hemisphere of my brain became non functional. The brain research performed by doctors Andrew Newberg and the late Eugene Diaquili, Diaquili earlier this decade have helped me understand exactly what was going on in my brain. Using SPECT technology, SPECT technology, single photon emission computed tomography, these scientists identified the neuroanatomy underlying our ability to have a religious or spiritual mystical experience. They wanted to understand which regions of the brain were involved in our capacity to undergo a shift in consciousness away from being an individual to feeling that we are at one with the universe, God, nirvana, euphoria. Tibetan meditators and Franciscan nuns were invited to meditate or pray inside the SPECT machine. They were instructed to tug on a cotton twine when they reach either their meditative climax or feel united with God. These experiments identified shifts in neurological activity in very specific regions in the brain. First, There was a decrease in the activity of the left hemisphere language centers, resulting in a silencing of their brain chatter. Second, there was a decrease in activity in the orientation association area, located in the posterior parietal gyrus of the left hemisphere. This region of our left brain keeps us identified, our personal physical boundaries. When this area is inhibited, our displays decrease input from our sensory systems. We lose insight of where we begin and where we end relative to the space around us. Orientation association area, physical boundaries, space and time. I'll show you an image of it. Thanks to this recent research, it makes good neurological sense that when my left language centers were silenced and my left orientation association area was interrupted from its normal sensory input, my consciousness shifted away from feeling like a solid to a perception of myself as a fluid at one with the universe. Okay. Can you see it? There you go. 1555 when we were just looking at that. So that should be the end of the chapter. It's on page 143. When I think of 143, I think of I love you because we used to text that to each other back in the days of pagers. And there was something else that I wanted to say about what was going on in that chapter. So hang on, let me think about it and then I'll end it. Okay. It had to do with those SPECT scans, SPECT. Dr. Daniel Amen. I first saw him on PBS. Like she was talking about how she was on PBS. I think I first saw Jill on, or Dr. Bolte Taylor. I think I saw her first on a TED Talk. So I don't know if I've ever seen her on PBS, but I know Dr. Daniel Amen I first saw on PBS. And he does a lot of like instruction on what to eat for your best brain health. Okay. So if you don't have like serious malfunctions going on because of some sort of like um physical trauma or, genetic trauma to the brain, whatever you want to call it. Okay. He gives you the best brain science. He used to be a medic in the army, and so was I, right? So I I I found that out like after I started listening to him and after I was interested in him. But I have a book called The End of, I can't remember, um like mental disease or something like that. Um so that is a big book. I don't know if I will read it, but the what he discovered was SPECT scans. Now the problem with that is that I don't think that it's really in like where it's covered by health insurance and stuff. So this is where we need to like focus our attention, see how important these things are for recovery, for like when people have personality changes and things like that. In order to identify where it comes from, we just assume it's the person. And what Dr. Amen was finding was that when he's doing these SPECT scans on people, since he already had thousands of scans in his like files, he was starting to see that people were having these issues of like brain damage or toxicities or whatever, but seemingly in their life nothing had changed. But once he started seeing like the patterns within the brain scans, he was realizing that people are like in toxic environments or they had moved, and that's kind of where this personality trait manifested. It was after the move. Okay. So that's what he's linking things. He's trying to help people from, so you don't have to rely on medications, though he does prescribe medications to help people um manage their symptoms, but he really wants you to get better naturally and understand yourself. Okay, so you can be an advocate of yourself and the people that you care about. Don't just get mad at people because they're not what you want them to be for themselves or for you or whatever. If you see a light in people, if you see their heart, you need to understand that the brain is not the heart, okay? And it can be formed and hypnotized and manipulated by society. We all know this. All right. I love you. We'll come back with the next one. All right. Bye.